Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson, and I'm so glad that you are here with us today. We have a really wonderful and I'm assuming it's going to be a very touching interview. So if you don't have your Kleenexes out quite yet, I'm going to give you a second to go get those. And my camera is not working very well. There's something going on here with my stuff. I don't know why. It's just the spiritual warfare is what I really think it is. And I'm not surprised because the enemy hates children and he hates motherhood. He hates Our Lady. She is the one who crushed his head with the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so please pray over this interview. If you're watching right now live, and if you are maybe listening later, pause it, pray, especially for yourself if you've experienced infertility, and for all women and families who are struggling with the heavy burden of miscarriage, child loss, or infertility. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because I know Mother's Day can be really hard for a lot of women. Sorry, and I'm pregnant, so I'm trying to keep my composure. It's such a heavy burden, and I know so many women, and myself included, have experienced what it's like to lose a child. And so I really wanted to talk to Theoni Bell, which was so interesting because she actually found me. I kept seeing her stuff all over my Instagram feed, and so many people were talking about this amazing new book that came out called Jellybean, A Baby's Journey to God. And so it was really a delight when Chris Lewis from Beartooth Catholic sort of reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in interviewing her?" I was like, "Absolutely, yes, I would love to." And so here we are. But before we get started, of course, please like, share, and subscribe. There are so many of you who listen to my interviews that haven't subscribed yet, and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe you can let me know in the comments why you haven't done that yet, but I would love for you to subscribe. We're close to the 1,000 mark here in YouTube, which is kind of a big deal. And if I get there, maybe I'll do something fun, like a Bob Ross art tutorial stream, like chill stream. I think that would be super fun. And there's a reason for the Bob Ross thing, so we can talk about it that another time. So all of that, and please also consider looking in the description for other ways that you can support this podcast. It costs money to produce this stuff. So however you can help, even if it's just in prayer, that is just more than a gift. I need all the prayer that I can get. And speaking of ways that you can support the show, I reached out to Elizabeth from Oremus Home Goods. We have a little bit of an affiliation there. So if you go to her store and use the code Integrated, you get 15% off on your purchase. But the reason I want to bring her up specifically today is because one of the reasons that she started Oremus Home Goods, I'm going to pull it up here actually, is because she has experienced, she's experienced infertility for quite some time. And it was actually why her business was born. That's why she started her business. So if you go to her website, Oremus Home Goods, you can find all of her products. And one of the reasons too that I wanted to bring her up today alongside this Mother's Day conversation is because she just recently came out with a new candle line that is really centered on grief. I'm wondering if I can find it here, the Infertility Grief Candle. So if you go and you have struggled with infertility or you've lost a child, I think this series of candles that she's putting together to honor those of us who have experienced this or are struggling or have struggled in the past, here's a candle. Get it blessed. You can light it in honor of your children that you never got to meet. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, offering those prayers to our Lord who's the light of the world. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up again. If you go to Oremus Home Goods, use the code Integrated, you get 15% off, and you can support an amazing Catholic business. So without further ado, we're going to be talking here with Theoni Bell. Here she is up on the screen. And we're talking about her book, Jellybean. And she has another book, A Woman in the Trees, if I'm not mistaken. It's the first book on it's a book on the first approved Marian apparition, which is in Champion, Wisconsin. For those of you who have not checked that out, definitely go look at her books. I do believe I have a link in the description to her books as well. So please welcome with me, Theoni Bell. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to chat with you. I've been trying to catch up on all your podcasts. So,
It's really sweet. Thank you so much. It's just such an honor. I think it's such a pleasure when I talk to other people like you because there have been so many times people are like, I've never heard of you before, but I really love your interview style. It's just nice because you let people talk, which
yeah,
I realize a lot of people maybe don't do that. So it's just very humbling, and I really appreciate that. That means
it's
a lot.
just more real. You can get a sense of someone's like real where their heart's at if you just let them talk for a minute instead of whatever show notes they put together. You know what I mean? It's not
Right.
their fault, but yeah, you just have to cut everything so short.
Right, especially on radio, which I mean, I do have some experience with radio, and it's a lot harder when you have such a short amount of time. But stories like yours, um, they deserve more time. It's like you need more time to breathe, really, and
Yeah.
let things settle when you're talking about something as heavy as infertility and child loss. So, if you wouldn't mind, maybe tell us the beginning of like where did this story begin for you?
In 2020, I was pregnant. I was 7 months pregnant with our daughter. Her name is Sloan. And I went into preterm labor, but I didn't really know it was preterm labor yet. I just had lots of aches and pains and started getting kind of scared and decided, no, oh, I'm not stretching enough. I'm not walking enough. I started doing all these things more. And then a friend said, you should probably call the doctor. And the doctor helped me realize that like the pain I was having was coming at intervals. And so I was in labor. And so 27 weeks along, I really didn't feel any fear that the baby wasn't going to survive because I've heard
Right.
the stories and I know that babies can survive at that age. So I remember on the way to the hospital, the kids were all nervous. I have 3 other children. At the time, they were, let's see, 9, 6, and 3. And I remember telling them, oh, this is great. We get to meet Sloan early, and she's going to have to stay at the hospital. They're going to take great care of her. And I'm just kind of getting them prepared that the baby is not going to be able to come home. So it was COVID at the time. So no one could come with me. I had to go in by myself, and I had to like sit in this hallway and pace because they couldn't let me in without like masking me up. And I don't know what they were doing, getting all their stuff on their arms and like the hazmat suit or whatever. And so I had to sit out there and wait, and finally got in and was all alone and, got the ultrasound, still just not expecting, like, still just so excited to like,
Mm.
my baby's coming. And, I lost another child, in 2011, and that was at 3 months. So like, I know the awkward pause and the silence of the like ultrasound tech that comes when your baby isn't okay. So um, that was there. She called another nurse in, and the nurse confirmed that the baby was dead. And I actually listened to the story you did, or the podcast you did on your sister's death and how to
Mm.
grieve well and your own miscarriage. And you mentioned like that primitive noise that comes out, that like
Oh,
guttural
that
first noise.
primal.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was there. And no one was there. Like my husband wasn't there. And I just remember I just grabbed the nurse and I just like clung to her and I just wailed. And then I had to tell my husband that our baby was dead on text message because there was no coverage. So I hate COVID. I just have to say I really hate COVID.
You and I both.
And
Ugh.
then I was still like, I was in so much shock. I was still like, I still get to meet my baby soon because I still had to like go through labor and everything. So he came back and they induced me and they like put a balloon in, like opened my cervix, and then like I pushed and I gave birth to her. And um like she was perfect. There's just not there was nothing wrong with her. Like all the ultrasounds had been perfect. Then she came out and she looked like my other children. And we held her, and Um, but they had to take her from us after like 15 minutes because I wouldn't stop bleeding. And
Mm.
so, like when you have like a regular vaginal labor, they push on your uterus a lot. And
Which
usually
is not necessary, but
they push on it, usually it's just a
it's
few
so
times.
painful.
Yeah, I actually threw out all the muscles in my back, like clenching the edges of the bed because I thought she was going to break my back. And I'm like, this isn't normal, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And she was like they were removing like the plastic sheets full of blood, and I'm just talking, like I'm a really cheerful, like kind of oblivious person sometimes. So I'm just chatting with everyone. And then all of a sudden the room went silent. Then I heard someone in the hallway say to the doctor, like, we're out of blood. The Red Cross is flying more in. That was like another effect of COVID, that they didn't have enough blood. So they started giving me transfusions, and they gave me like white blood, or they gave me blood, and they gave me cryo, and they gave me platelets. And so I would come to find later that all of this was like related to my daughter's
Mm.
death. But I spent the night. I had my like battle with God. When he took the baby, I wasn't mad. It was kind of like, this has happened. There's nothing I can do about it. And I just needed him. But when I thought he was going to take me, I got super pissed off. And I was like, it was futile, right? Like, you don't wrestle with God. But I was like, there's no way. Like, you can't do this to my family. Like, you can't do this to my kids and my husband. And we wrestled for a while. And then obviously I made it through, and I was in the hospital for 5 days. And then I had like blood clots in my lungs. So when I went home, those were there. And I had to take some meds for that for a few years. But I'm a writer. So while I was in there and my family couldn't be with me, they dropped off this suitcase full of things that I might want. And there was a brand new journal. Like, you know how lovely it is to get like just a fresh, beautiful journal. So
Yeah.
inside the front cover, my husband had asked my 9-year-old to write, "Mom, write me a story or tell me a story." And so I wanted to write her a story, just like a fun story, but all I could think about was Sloan. And so I wanted to tell Sloan's story. So I just started to, like, who was my baby? Like, what was her life like? And I know that she knew us because they respond. They respond when you talk to them, and they respond when you push on them, and I've had a baby at like 7 months leap inside me because someone dropped something and it was loud. Like,
Yeah, they startle. Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
So like, I know she knew us, and I was like, how can I capture this? And I just started to talk from her perspective, like what she loved. Well, she loved my voice. She always responded to it, and she loved playing at night because she never let me sleep. You know what I mean? Like, these were things I could know about her. So when I got out of the hospital, I kept working on this. I like writing poetry. I won't say I'm very good at it, but I find it very therapeutic. And so I thought, I'm going to make this a poem. And it was just kind of a personal project for me to hold on to Sloan. But when I got home, I was hearing, I used to be on Instagram. I'm not now. I feel like Sloan actually told me to get off after she died
Mm.
because it was a distraction. Um, and but I was hearing from like dozens of women every day, just telling me they're sorry, sharing their own stories. Some women were telling me, I've lost babies and I have blood clots too. Or I had some people tell me about their spouse dying, and just like everyone wanted to share their grief with me. And they were asking, no one was asking anything of me. It was just whatever you need, whatever you need. I had people, we raised over $5,000 for the funeral in 2 days.
Wow.
Um, it was just amazing. And eventually I had this poem, and I felt like I could give back as women were sharing their story with me. And moms in my homeschool group that I had known for, 6 years, who had lost babies, who had lost infants, and I never knew they carried that weight, right? And now I was just joined this huge community that I didn't know was there. And so I began to share the poem just in hopes it might bring some comfort. And I just started to get feedback like, this is beautiful, or I wept when I read this. This is so healing. And as I started to get these, I thought, well, maybe this can be something bigger than just for me personally. And like, I know women lose babies um, at a lot earlier stages and later stages than, my baby that I portrayed in the book. But in the end, it's all our story, because the story is really about how we interact with our faith during all of that,
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the story came from.
Yeah, there were so many things that I wanted to pause on. Um, what was it? I'm trying to think. Because I remember when I had my miscarriage, I mean, it was kind of overshadowed by my sister's death in a way. I hate saying it that way, but it's kind of true because
It's true.
it was just my whole life was consumed by my sister's car accident and planning her funeral and everything else. And I lost my child at such an early stage of development. Um, but I remember, for example, like going back to the doctor's office to get my levels checked for the HCG or
Hmm.
HGC, whatever it is. I should know by
HCG,
now.
I think.
I should know by now. And I remember later seeing on my paperwork, spontaneous abortion. And that was brutal for me. I've been an anti-abortion activist for now well over a decade, and I
Yeah.
remember thinking how cruel it was, the language even that we used to talk about child loss and miscarriage, especially in a medical setting because it feels so sterile so often. Um, did you feel like your providers there were supportive, especially in light of it being COVID and how, I mean, it's just so inhumane. Like
Yeah.
2020, 2021 was so inhumane, especially to women and children, I think, especially when it comes to childbirth and everything else. It was cruel. Like
Yeah.
women going for their ultrasounds by themselves because they weren't allowed to bring anyone and finding out
I
all
had
by
those too.
themselves that their child died. I mean, things
The
like
only
that.
footage I have of Sloan, I mean, good came out of that is because I filmed her
Mm.
ultrasound for my husband because he couldn't be with us.
And how did your husband how has he responded? Because I've talked to a lot of women who even my own husband, I mean, I'm not trying to disparage him or anything, and
Yeah.
I understand men kind of deal with grief differently, but for him, it was very different. It was a different experience. It was early on in my pregnancy, and I don't think he had really connected with the baby quite yet. And so I really grieved alone, I would say.
Mm.
And I know that's not every woman's experience on the other end of things. I know husbands who are like just so excited and so connected with their babies from the beginning. Um, how has your husband handled your losses?
Do you want me to answer provider question or husband question first?
You provider first and then your
Okay.
husband. Yeah.
So I'll give you two short stories about that because both of my losses were dealt with totally differently. After we
Mm,
found out our first child died at right around 2.5, 3 months,
mm.
we were put into this room at the clinic, and this man walked in. I think he was like Norwegian or something, so that was already weird with the big accent. And then he started to tell us. Um, like the gall of this guy. He started to tell us that we hadn't lost a baby, that it was the hope of a baby that we had lost, and that this was God's way of making Gerber babies. Something was
Lord
wrong.
Jesus, have mercy. Oh, on that
Something was
soul.
wrong with our baby, and this was God's way from like sparing us. And like we literally had just seen before they told us she was dead, I had turned to my husband and was like, "There's her little hand." You know what I mean? Like that was not the promise of a baby. That was not a clump of cells, whatever you want to say. Like that was a child.
Biologically, it's just not that's not a fact.
Well,
He is
even at conception, yes. Um,
That's
so
cruel. That
that
is
was the
a
first
cruel. I'm
experience, and my
so sorry.
husband, like, God bless him, like, he held it together so much and was so poised, and later he was like, "I wanted to punch that guy in the face," like, he was so upset, and so that was the first experience, and then I lost 2 other children. Those were chemical pregnancies, and that's another term, right? It's like,
Mhm.
it wasn't really a baby, it was just
Yeah,
some
the
chemicals floating
sterilization.
around.
Yeah.
Okay, and then with Sloan, I actually wrote a lot about this on Instagram when I was on there. I was absolutely blown away. It gave, like, the reaction of the nurses at this hospital gave me faith in humanity again. Like,
Mm.
being part of the pro-life movement and just the war that's going on, you forget there might be people out there who don't ascribe to this. Like, maybe they're not vocal about it, but they're still humane. And so that first nurse who held me when I was crying, and then I went into the hospital with like a rosary around my wrist, and one of the nurses saw it. So when they took the baby and they put her in this little white dress and took pictures of her for me, someone had gone to their car and gotten a green rosary and put it in Sloane's hands because they knew that, like, I loved Our Lady. So I have that rosary and I have those pictures. So like they just went, like, they made me like a, a, a memorial box, and one woman came in to like draw blood or something, and she just sat and talked to me and cried with me for like half an hour. So then when I had to go back to the maternity ward after I recovered from like the blood loss, and so they had like turned the whiteboard around so it had nothing on it about babies, but like the crib was still in there. And
Mm.
so they like, oh no, and they like rolled that out. And so it was like everyone was very sensitive. Now, if I had for some reason been in the hospital because I had, like, a tubular pregnancy or even an early miscarriage gone wrong or something, or gone more wrong,
Yeah.
maybe they wouldn't have responded. But they had all held her and seen her. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It was visceral for them too. So yeah,
Right.
I think it can go either way. But I
I
had,
think those earlier pregnancy losses tend to be dismissed more readily.
yes,
And that would bear out in the data, right? Like, most people don't believe that it's really a baby until a certain point in
yes,
pregnancy. And
yeah,
so there's definitely that. And two, I think back when I lost my child, I didn't really totally understand, like, it was like my brain, nobody had prepared me that that might happen. I didn't think it would happen because I had had one successful pregnancy already.
yeah,
And so it just never occurred to me that I might lose a child. And I didn't have the wherewithal to like try and um say, like, it's hard to describe, and it feels callous when I think about it. I think my brain was like not working. I had my best friend there. Um and while I was losing my baby, I was like, I didn't think to like save my baby. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
like,
yes.
and
I
there's
know
a
exactly what you mean
and
because
I
I did
think
the same kind of thing.
and that's like something I don't think women really talk about very much, because there's a lot of guilt and grief that comes from that. Like, am I a monster? And how could I not do that? Or like, and then there's like that lack of closure. Like, I didn't get
Yeah,
to bury my child either.
yeah.
And so, like, what are some things that has helped you? Both situations are really different, and they come with different crosses in some ways, like that.
Mhm.
Um, how have you healed and moved forward from this, and your family too? Like, what are some things that have helped you?
Um, I would say with our first loss, I was a fairly new Catholic as well, and my faith wasn't as strong as it is now. I care, and my motherhood wasn't as strong as it is now. Like, I,
Mm,
I believe I'm a better mom now, more attached to my children than in the beginning. So I have
me
this,
too.
yeah,
Mhm.
I have the same kind of feeling when I look back. Like, her name is Effie. I carried Effie for a month, and then I had to have a DNC, and that kind of
Mm.
tears me up because that's what they do when people have abortions. And so,
Yeah.
um, my husband, when we were able to bury Effie, and when we went to the church, and they gave us this tiny little box, and my husband was like, "Do you want to carry her?" And I was like, "No." And I was just like, I don't even know how to process this. And so that was like the extent of my emotional ability to like feel that loss. And um my daughter, my daughter that came after Effie, like, I told her all about Effie, and she used to have this little locket where she had drawn a picture of what she thought Effie would look like, and felt very connected to this
Mm.
child of ours. But with Sloan, the pain was like so intense. And it still like hits you like that post-traumatic stress where suddenly you remember there's this thing you had that you don't have anymore and like there's something missing. But in the beginning, like I can bring my husband into this discussion now. We had started praying the rosary as a family every night during COVID. Like we had tried to do it for years, always fell off. And then COVID, it was like, if there isn't a good time to do it, I don't know when it is, it's now.
Yeah.
So we were on a 3-week streak. Woohoo. And I was in the hospital, and he prayed the rosary. We prayed the rosary as a family over video chat. And when we got home, we kept that up. And that was like the number one most healing thing we did. The graces, the comfort that came from so many aspects of it, just being together, like at the end of the day, when all of us have been holding back all these feelings, probably feeling tons of stuff we haven't shared with each other. And then now we're sitting in silence with this beautiful candlelight, and we're going to Mary, we're going to our Lord together. For months, there wasn't a night where one of us cried. Like I usually was the one who cried, and then one of the children would come up and like give me like a leg rub or just sit on my lap. So that was like the most healing thing we did. This is going to sound weird, but my 3-year-old she's so mousy. Like all her features are so dainty. Like she's long and lanky. And so she was like the littlest thing I had in my life once I lost Sloan. And I came home that night, and it was like she knew that I needed that. I asked if it could be my night to put her to bed, and I put her to bed, and I just sat there and I looked at her, and I just like ran my fingers like over her face and just held her little hands, and like she just knew it, and she put her forehead to mine and like kissed me. Like she just had this sense, and even now I'll lay down in bed with her. She's 6, and like just remember that one night that I had with her. And also it gives me great fear that God will take her from me. So there's like
okay,
good
can
and
we talk
bad.
about that?
Yeah.
Can we talk about that too? Because I know for a long time, and it comes up again, especially when my body is physically dysregulated, when I am struggling more with anxiety and intrusive thoughts and things like that. But for at least a year after my miscarriage and my sister's death, anytime I saw sirens, instantly my stomach dropped, and I thought someone was coming to tell me that my husband died on the job. And for anyone who maybe has followed my podcast for a long time, my husband is a lineman, so he's in a really dangerous line of work. And so for a long time, I just expected another thing to happen, right? Because you're just there's so much going on in your brain at that time and in your nervous system. How have you dealt with that aspect of things? Because I do feel like it creeps up sometimes.
Yeah, it was intense. Like I have a baseline of anxiety in general. I've had it since my family, my parents were divorced, and there's like tons of abuse in my history. And so I've had anxiety since I was like 4 years old. So I'm used to it, but this was like a level of fear that like there's anxiety where you're just kind of shaky and a little unsure of yourself, and then there's just like something terrible is happening and it's not,
Yeah.
So I felt that. Yes, I felt that. And I think it lasted about a year, like you said. It didn't help that my husband, like 2 years before Sloan died, was diagnosed with late onset diabetes 1. So he was in and out of the hospital for like 2 years after Sloan died, just with his own issues.
Oh,
that was hard. But I took it to prayer, and I just was like, I can't live constantly scared that God's going to hurt me again. Like I have to trust him. I want to trust him. And I would tell him that. And so one night we were praying, and I just did what I always did. I was sitting there in the silence, and I was starting to feel scared that I was going to die and or one of my kids was going to die and how could I handle that? Just my thoughts were rolling. And then I feel like I just received this grace and it just changed my perspective. And so now, like, I can't describe like what I felt in the moment, but it was like if you're going to die, like just embrace it. I learned a long time ago what you're afraid of, like just like imagine it. Imagine it and face it and you have to
Oh,
accept it. You have to resign yourself to it and just carry it out to the worst end and what can you do? And so I was like if I'm going to die, I want to go to heaven. I want even more now that I have know that Sloan is there, believe that Sloan is there. I want to go to heaven. So what am I going to do in this moment of fear so that if I do die right now, um, I'm going to get to heaven. And I decided every time I felt fear, I would reach out in love so that if I
mm,
was going to die, which was like nonsense, right? If I was going to die, my very last act would be sacrifice. Like that was the only way I could guarantee that something good would come if I was going to die right now.
that's
So
so interesting.
so I would
I
reach out and rub my husband's neck. He wants
oh,
a neck rub like every 5 minutes. Okay. So I get tired of it, you know?
yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this thing that he loves. I'm going to rub his neck, you know, like, or I'm going to just turn to my child, smile, no matter how irritating things
Hmm.
are or tired I am. And I'm going to tell him I love him. Like, I'm just going to, like, if it turned into me also like, if we're fighting at nighttime, my husband and I will not lay down until I've apologized. I will not go to bed until we have made up
Mm,
because that's all I can do. That's all I have control of in terms of my life and my death. You know what I
mm.
mean?
Yeah, and
Anyway,
of course, staying in a state of grace. That was ironically, I
yes.
was in a car accident this weekend, and it was minor. But of course, that's a huge fear of mine after my sister died.
Sorry.
That's how my sister died, you know?
Yeah.
And there's no way I'm gonna explain that to somebody when she's like the woman who hit me, she sideswiped me on a big interstate. We're going about 65 miles an hour. And so really anything could have gone wrong, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's 3:30 in the afternoon. It's pretty busy on the interstate, and I just think, "My goodness, one overcorrection or anything. If I
Yeah.
hadn't been on the far left lane and I was in the middle of a bunch of cars, what if I'd hit another person?" It was just like my brain is just every scenario firing.
Yeah.
And, she kept looking at me like, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" When we pulled over, she felt really bad. She knew it was her fault. And my thought after I finally got back in my car and sort of dealt with police and everything was, "Well, at least I went to confession this morning."
Yes. I mean, that is the thought you should have, though. I was really mad at myself after this whole I lost Sloan and got home from the hospital because when I thought I was going to die, I wasn't praying. I
Oh my
wasn't
goodness. Yes.
saying sorry. I was like, hell no, you're not taking me. You know
Okay,
what I mean?
but that's another thing too, because I almost died from COVID. Legit almost died from COVID.
Okay.
And I think I just kept thinking like it's gonna get better. It's gonna get better. And I was not getting better.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going in because who's gonna come watch my kids? No one wants to go out of their home and watch someone else's kids. And my husband has to stay home with the kids. And I'm not really in a state to be driving right now. I mean, I could not function.
Yeah.
And oh, my camera disconnected again.
Can
But
still hear you though.
okay, good. And it was crazy because after I got better, I was like, "Oh my goodness, that would have been the time for me to receive my final sacrament." Like,
Yeah.
that would have been the time for me to call my priest and say, "Hey, I need anointing of the sick right now." And I was so mad at myself that it did not occur to me. It didn't even occur to me. It's so weird to think that
Because
it
you're
did not occur to me.
clinging. You're still clinging to your life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Or
hope
in,
that
like, total denial. I mean, I was
yeah.
in total denial that I was in such a state.
Yeah, I think like I hope when I do die that whatever like resignation I've practiced all this time will be there. I do.
Resignation, and uh, that's another thing, like, actively surrendering your day. I feel like for me, the things I have to focus on are gratitude when I'm really struggling, like, gratitude for
Yes.
everything, and, like, practicing that because if I'm not practicing gratitude, that anxiety and depression really, it can really overtake me, and bring
That's
me into really dark places.
that's so my son has really bad like problems with anger.
Mm.
It's kind of like the skeleton in the closet, but he's like very open about it with people, and doesn't feel bad about it. So I'm glad, but
Mm.
just rage, just like he's in
Mm.
so much pain when he enters that place. Like I used to get mad at him, but now it's like I just look at him and I'm like, man, I was there. I was this kid with all these
Mm.
problems and didn't know how to get better. And so one of the things that I just instituted like 4 days ago was at dinner, because dinner always ends up like being just loud and obnoxious or something.
I
Or
feel
we
that.
or we or we like talk about TV shows. I'm like, come
Right.
on, are we this dumb, guys? So I said I want everyone every day at dinner to say 3 things they're grateful for about today. Not like I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful for
Mm.
my job, I'm great, like today I
Mhm.
want 3 things. And then even when he's like going into that dark place and can't get himself out of it, I'll just make him stand still. And like the other day I was like, look at, we're outside. It's beautiful out. There's like 18 different types of birds making noise right now. Like, can you just be right here and feel how
Present.
good? Yeah, that feels good. So focus on that. So yeah, gratitude. My mom always said I was the most grateful of her 3 kids. My siblings are kind of spoiled. I love them, but so I've never totally struggled with the gratitude part of
The
things.
things you can say when you're anonymous, I love it.
Uh, oh man. I was like the thrift store kid, and they were like, everything Tommy Hilfiger or
That
whatever
is
was.
so funny.
Yeah. Um, so I think another thing that helped was reading the like one of the reasons I thought this book, Jellybean, would be so important is because of how much reading helped me after I lost Sloan.
Mm.
Specifically reading the stories that people were sharing with me. But then also I bought Called to a Greater Love, and it's a compilation of all the letters of Saint Zélie and Saint Louis Martin.
Mm.
And so I know Saint Zélie is like a favorite for women who have lost babies. And
Yeah.
so I had just happened to like meet Saint Zélie a few weeks before I lost Sloan, and so I turned to her. Well, she lost 3 infants and 1 5-year-old,
Mm.
and I, fe- I felt this way actually listening to the story of your sister as well. Like I don't want to touch a nerve, but when like you ride the roller coaster of someone else's terrible story, right?
Mm.
And like the climax is coming, you know what happened. It's usually the title of the podcast or the book, right? Like you
Yeah.
know what's going to happen and you fear it, but like you also yearn for it. Like something about it feels good. And so last night when I was listening to your sister's story, I was like, why does that feel good though? Like
Hmm.
why do maybe it doesn't for everyone, but like why do I feel such a release at that moment when someone else like is telling me like it's the pinnacle of their story and it's where they find out they lost someone. And I think it's because it's the strongest association that I have with my baby. Like I
Mm.
loved her, I have that feeling, and I had joy over her and hope and all these things, but like the strongest feeling is that grief, that loss. And so it's kind of like it's the last association and the strongest. So when I read, like when I read Saint Zélie's writings, like I was in her life, I was in her story, and when she just grieved in those letters and she struggled with God, and I mean, if you read those letters, they are every woman's lost story. Like the guilt,
Mm.
she writes about the guilt. I mean, and just gut-wrenching guilt she had because her children were born and she was trying to save them while they were sick.
Mm.
Like she blamed herself for killing her oldest one that died at 5 because she had forced her to like take a bite of food,
Mm.
and then like it hurt. The girl was in so much pain from taking this bite of food in the state she was in, and like day later or a few hours later she died. So she had this guilt, like if I hadn't have made her eat. Well, what else are you going to do? Like us looking
Right.
in, we're like, what else are you going to do? Of course you're her mom, you want her to eat. So anyway, reading, I don't know if that's for everybody, but reading the stories of loss from other people, and even my children, we found 2 novels I have them written here. I'm just trying to find the name. Okay. Um, One is called Miraculous, and it's about a boy. He goes around his neighborhood to make a compilation of all the stories of miraculous things people have seen in their lives. But the backstory is that he just lost an infant sibling and his
Mm.
mom won't come out of her room. And so, like, it's from his perspective. And then the other one is called Whale of the Wild, and it's about a pod of whales. And the sister whale is waiting for her sister to be born, and they can see the baby moving inside and all this stuff. And then the baby's born dead, and she takes her. And she said,
Mm.
I'm going to bring you to the ancient burial grounds, and talks to her the whole way. And like, so I read these with my kids when they could handle it. Um, and my daughter said that she really related to Elizabeth Ann Seton because Elizabeth Ann Seton lost all her kids, lost her husband.
Mm.
And so anyway, I just think that, like, it's so cliche, but like the power of stories.
Well, it's
It's
something
huge.
that makes us human, right? Like that is uniquely human. There is no other creature that is sharing stories. That's like one of like some of the oldest traditions of humanity is to create these odysseys and these stories, and then they're shared over and over and over again generationally, and you had to memorize them perfectly so you could convey the message of this story perfectly. And really the storytelling is part of our humanity. Like I don't think it can be possibly overstated the importance of storytelling, both for sharing in our humanity and having a common understanding of the other,
Yes.
and also preserving culture. Like that
Yeah.
storytelling is so important. And obviously your story was like this book was so needed because it sold out like right away.
We
Yeah,
sold 1,500 copies in a month. I just
it's
confirmed that
crazy.
yet last night to make sure I wasn't exaggerating. Yeah, it's been crazy. I can tell, like, so I don't even feel like it's mine. Like, I feel like I did it and I gave it away. And so when I hear these numbers and I read these reviews, I'm just like, that. How did I do that? how how did that come out of me? And I'm just like, God, like, you work miracles.
He does.
Because I just never expected. I never expected it. And I sadly, I haven't read it to my kids since we got it.
Hmm.
Um, One of them, the most open of my children, the one who I thought would love it the most, and because she was the one who always asked questions and always wanted to retell the story over and over, and was just talking to strangers about her sister who died and, all these things. She got the book. We got them in the mail. I gave her her copy. I filled out the first page, dedicated it to her, and then I watched her walk away with it. And then I came around the corner and I saw her standing and swaying in her room, just reading it page by page. And then she saw me and she slammed it shut, and she hasn't opened it since. And she won't let
Mm,
me read it to her. So the grief in her is at a different place, I think, than it was. Just last
it's
night, I
deep.
told my husband we need to set a time where he reads it to us as a family, um, because they've heard bits and pieces. Like, my daughter's image is actually one of the references that the illustrator
Mm,
used in the book. So, like, they're familiar with it and the story, obviously, but
mm.
the grief of
It's
kids.
it's hard to deal with that aspect too because like my kids know that there's another sibling that they never got to meet.
Yeah.
And it's also weird because I was 6 months postpartum with my oldest when I found out I was pregnant, and there was a lot of, um, anxiety surrounding that pregnancy because I was not ready to be a mom again. I
Yeah.
was still trying to figure out, my 23-year-old self, like, how the heck do I do this with a 6-month-old? And then, finally started to come to terms with this pregnancy and kind of get excited, and then we lost the baby.
Yeah.
And then it was maybe 6 months or so later that I found out I was pregnant with my son, John,
3. Wow.
and he would not be here if I had if that pregnancy, if that I named him Michael, but if Michael had survived. And it's so interesting to me because John is the one who talks about Michael a lot, and he asks a lot of questions, and he tells people about Michael. Um, which I always find so interesting. Like he has this connection with this baby. And And it is hard to explain. Like, I was sharing with him that a couple of moms I know recently have lost their babies, and it's just been horrible situations for both of them. And like, it's always a horrible situation.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just sad. And he goes, "Mom, why does God make babies and if they're gonna die?" And I remember that was one of the questions that I wrestled with. I still
Yeah.
remember driving in my car at 2 in the morning to adoration because I had an overnight hour. And I was like mad at God. Like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? I didn't do this. Like,
Yeah.
why did you do this? And that is some of the anger that I think we are prone to wrestling with too, of like, and why so many people struggle with this idea that God would permit suffering. How did you come to reconcile with God's active and permissive will?
Oh, that's still a mystery to me. I still can't wrap my head around something that he permits but doesn't will, like, actively. Um, I mean, I just always fall back on the fact that, like, he doesn't want it to be this way. His world that he created was not supposed to be like this.
Yeah.
I in your podcast I listened to last night, you mentioned, you're the only other person I've ever heard mention it, that death was a grace. It was like a gift to us. Otherwise, we'd be stuck forever suffering.
In this state,
And
yeah.
I was like, that's awesome. Like, I kind of like death now, you know? But
Memento mori, you guys.
yeah. So um because of my history with mental health problems, because of all the trauma, my childhood, and like I have parents who are still living that I've already let go of. Like, I know we're never going to have relationships. Um I
Mm.
just it's not like I was ready for it, but I just don't fight back anymore. Like, I've like I've just wrestled and like swirled around issues and just fought against what was happening in my life. I don't know how to describe it. Like, just waking up and wishing things weren't the way they were, and just always in my head trying to be somewhere else, always trying to be someone else.
Mhm.
At some point, I just got good at just not doing that anymore. So, like I said, when Sloan died, I never asked why. Like, I know bad things happen, and I just kind of accepted it, and I needed him. I need more than like questioning and wrestling with him, like I needed him.
Mm.
And so I just submitted. Um yeah, I don't really know. I don't know why I didn't wrestle like that.
That's
I
maybe
have
a special
wrestled.
grace, yeah.
Yeah, I have wrestled with things. Like, for instance, when my anxiety is really bad, that's when I get really mad at God. And that's when
Mhm.
I'm like, why? Like, I'm working out. I'm taking my medication. I'm sleeping more. I'm deep breathing. I'm doing everything. Why am I in so much pain? You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
why? And the answer is always, like, what's the quote? Is it Saint Teresa of Avila who's like, if this is how you treat your friends? What was it?
Yeah.
What, do you know it?
Yeah, 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 oh, how does it go? Yes, it is along the
Like,
now
I
I'm
don't want to
gonna
be one then, whatever it
yeah,
was.
yeah.
Because and like in the Bible, there's all these verses where it's like God is going to treat you like a child, and what kind of father doesn't discipline you? Like, we don't want to think about it as discipline. That's kind of Old Testament way of looking at it. Jesus said it differently, right? But um, for you to grow, you have to suffer. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I didn't like Saint Therese of Lisieux at first. When I
Hmm.
first converted, I thought she was ordinary, kind of boring. And it's because I hadn't gone deep enough into her soul, into her
Mhm.
mind. And I needed to meditate on her writings to really understand the depth of like her yearning for things and her suffering. That's what led to like her spiritual heights. But
Mm.
I don't know. I just always go to that place. Like, you must. Oh, actually, now that, yes, I remember, God prepared me by my best friend's daughter got cancer the summer before we lost Sloan. And it was like the size of like a softball or a grapefruit in her
Mm.
stomach. And my friend, whenever I'd check in with her and talk to her, she'd be like, just totally fine. And she wasn't saying like everything's going to be fine. She was just so even keel. And I swore that she was holding back. Like I swore like she needed to cry or like talk. And then she finally just said like, if this is what my daughter and I need to go through to get to heaven, then I have to accept that. And I was like, dang, that's
That is
crazy.
faith.
That your
Yeah.
daughter might die. And I know that hurts you, but your faith is just carrying you. And so I thought of her that day I lost Sloan. Like she had given me the example on how to proceed. And also, I don't know if you saw it on Instagram. There was a young man in 2020. His name was Franz, and he got in a ski accident
Yes.
and he was
Mhm.
paralyzed. Well, he's related to one of the women in my homeschool group. So
Oh,
I was
wow.
following
Wow.
his story very closely, and I was just really feeling wrapped up in his suffering. I was emailing with his mom and just everything that they shared. Like he said something I took, Baritis has that image of the crusader with the rosary. And
Yes.
I
Mhm.
said, "Can you send me that image? I'm not going to sell it. I want to put it up in my house with a quote." And he's like, "Yeah, sure." It was a quote by Franz, and it was basically like I am a soldier in my Lord's army, and I will stand where he has placed me in this fight. And it was like
Mm.
he's referring to the suffering he's going through. That's where God needed him to be in this battle, like in the church militant. And so that was another example. And then there was also at that same time a woman named Christine or Christina, and her husband was battling brain cancer. She was also in the Mass of the Ages
Mhm.
first episode, I think. And so I had followed that story like I said, I told you in an email, like this was a season of suffering that like I didn't know was going to reach me so closely, but I had followed all her posts and just like reflected on what like a terrible wife I was. There was one she put up where she was like, I I've never felt more blessed than to like sponge bath my husband.
Mm.
And I was thinking to myself, like, if I had to sponge bathe my husband and like had no help, this house would fall apart and I would be so bitter. And like she just like handled her suffering so well. So like yeah, those three, my friend with cancer, whose daughter had cancer, and then Christine and Franz, like I feel like God like put all of those things on my radar. Um there was one night Christine was sharing that she thought her husband was not dying because he wouldn't let go because he
Mm.
didn't want to leave them. He didn't think they could handle it. Like she shared that in a post. And I had a migraine. I suffer really bad migraines, and I had this migraine for like a whole day, and I was on the floor in the bathroom and I was crying and I was saying, "Okay, God, I'm done. Like I can't offer anything up." And then her husband came to mind and I was just like, "I've been wasting all this time suffering without
Oh,
offering this up."
boy.
I know.
Yeah, I know, I've done that so many times. Yes.
So I
Yeah.
said, "All right, I will keep this migraine as long as it takes. Please let that husband release himself to you." And she posted the next morning that he had passed away. I'm
Wow.
not saying that was from me, but I was like, "Man, you are definitely showing me what the communion of saints is supposed to look like what we're supposed to do for each other." Like it's one thing to like I don't know, it's like one thing to give up a coffee for your friend. Like
Right.
I drink like 8 a day, so it's like nothing. Okay? But it's another to be like Jesus did. Like pain that is going to kill you, it hurts so bad, you know?
Mhm.
And you're still like your will is still turning toward it. I don't do that often. I can say I've probably only done that one time cuz when I get migraines I do want them to go away, but
Yep, I understand that totally. But I how many times do we waste our suffering? And I do think the saints have spoken about that so many times.
yeah.
Like, you know, what I would rather go back on earth to suffer more if that meant that I would attain a higher place in heaven. And that's something too that I think
Yeah.
we often don't think about. The saints have said that. I think Saint Gemma Galgani maybe said that, and she suffered tremendously. And yet here we are. I feel like we live in first world problems, right? Like a lot of the time where our suffering can be legitimate, and then other times it's maybe just very poor perspective, and we're not orienting ourselves to God to embrace that suffering. Because I always think too, like, if God himself, if his son, our Lord, suffered, why do we think that we would escape that same
Yeah.
fate? You know,
Yeah.
like, that is how we are sanctified more often than not. And it's because it forces us to detach and realize. I remember so many people saying, like, Angela, you are so strong and all this stuff. And I remember thinking, and you can handle this. And I remember thinking, like, I can't. Like, I can't do this. I actually cannot handle this. I can't do it. And that's the best place to be, is that realization of, like, no, I can't do this, but God can.
What's
And
the
so I
Bible verse in the letter, in the probably one of Paul's letter, where he says, "My strength is made," I forget the word,
perfect in weakness.
perfect
Yep.
in your weakness.
Yep.
And I loved that you said that in your podcast. God
Mm.
doesn't give you more than you can handle. And
Oh
your
yeah,
answer was
that's what
like,
it is.
heck, yes, he
Yes,
does.
he
He
does.
does give
Yes,
you
he
more.
does. It's a lie. Now,
No.
were there other things that people said to you that you sort of were like, this is not helpful. This is not helpful right now.
Um, no.
People are
Honestly, when
very
I
sensitive to
listen to
you.
those sections of different talks I've listened to where it's like, do not say this, I'm usually pointing at myself like, oh man, I so totally would have said that. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
Like you earlier talking about struggling with like, why God, like, why do you make babies and then take them? And then here I come in, save the day, and I'm like, oh, it's just God, God allows suffering so we can grow. And in that moment, you'd be like, no. That's one thing I've learned through all of this:
Prudence. Yeah.
prudence and silence. I just had this ring made. It has 3 Bible verses on it,
Mm.
where Mary ponders things. And that's like one of my biggest problems is I just talk so much. I always have an opinion. Like I'm always nagging my husband. Like, why do I need to tell him what to eat? He knows what to eat. You know what I mean? And so I just felt like these 3 verses where Mary, like, she just had the Son of God, and the wise men come, or maybe it was the shepherds, but it says she just stored these things in her heart.
Mhm.
I'd be like gabbing and, oh, well, what did you hear about him? Did you read the scripture? Like I'd be saying the dumbest stuff, and Mary just ponders. She also pondered when she learned she was going to have a sword pierce her heart, and then when she found Jesus in the temple. Like, what
Mm.
mom is just going to ponder that?
Not me.
So
Oh,
that,
yeah.
like, when you, like you said, I don't know, maybe people need to read more books to learn how to grieve better with others. I think people need to sit in that uncomfortable
They
silence.
totally do. They
That's
totally do.
that's all you need to do sometimes. I mean, yeah,
Oh, and I
uh,
think it's a lack of presence, right? Like, a lot
yeah,
of people we're so uncomfortable with grief, and just in general, we're uncomfortable with sitting in the present. It's not just in grief, but
yeah,
it's a cultural phenomenon of living in the 21st century. I think we are so uncomfortable with the present. We're always looking to the future. We're always striving for something. We're always grasping at something.
I'm
Or
guilty.
or we're always looking behind, and we're looking at who we can blame, and we're looking at other kinds of grief where we're like, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. Like, that sort of mourning and loss, which can be good, but it has to be ordered towards healing in the present. And a lot of it is people just sitting in that without any sort of direction, or looking forward and totally ignoring the present.
Yeah,
And so sitting in grief requires, if you want to heal, just sitting in it and just, like, being familiar with grief. Like, sitting down in that chasm that just overwhelms you and saying, like, Lord, I need you in this darkness because you are the light and you are the one who's going to pull me out of this
yeah,
when it is your time to pull me out of it. And
yes,
that's the other hard part too.
yeah. I've never been very good with awkward silence, so that has definitely been hard, but it's been beautiful. When we moved into our new house in Houston, we moved across the street from a widow, and I was like, "Thank you, Lord." Like I can finally like do a charitable work outside of just raising my children, you know. And we adopted her as grandma, and there are some times like I've had to bring her to the hospital. She's been like close to death. She's like 87.
Mm.
Just this week, she like passed out. And I went
Oh.
over and called the ambulance, but she was sitting there and she goes, "Man, I really wish Joe was here." That's her
Mm.
husband. And now the old me would have just started talking about something. The new me was like, I just need to sit next to her and I need to rub her hair. That's all I did. And she totally calmed down and the moment passed and like it's so simple. It's so simple because like you can't fix anything going on. All you can be is like it's like a cozy thing, like a comfort, like
Mhm.
a tea or like a
Well, we
warm
wanna
blanket.
fix everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
we wanna fix, and they're just things that we cannot fix. So, and speaking, I guess, in that framework, like, what are your thoughts on, have you had anybody approach you about your book and say, "Well, the church doesn't teach that babies who have died go to heaven. What about St. Augustine and talking about limbo and things like that?" What are your thoughts on that? Because like I said, or I didn't say, but the church doesn't have a specific teaching on where these children go. St. Augustine posits limbo along with some other theologians and things like that, but the church also describes in the catechism that we entrust these children to the mercy of God.
Hmm.
And so, my thought is like, well, maybe they go to limbo and then at the end of time are welcomed into heaven. I just can't imagine heaven without laughter of children. Like that,
Yeah.
just in my humanness, I think like there's literally no better sound than that of a child laughing. You know? I don't know. It's like, what are your thoughts on that? Did you wrestle with that aspect of
I
things at
still
all?
do. I still do because the first the first time that came up was when I was still in the hospital. It was like the day after I lost Sloan.
Mm,
And I'm getting all of these messages like your little saint is with my saint in heaven and you'll see your baby in heaven someday. Hopefully you just got to try to get there. Like all these comforting thoughts. And then one came through and it said, like, I just want to let you know that babies don't go to heaven who aren't baptized. They go to limbo. Like
things things that you don't say to someone who is grieving in that moment.
and like my heart
Sweet.
actually went out to this woman because like
Mm,
she lives with that. And also I'm pretty sure she's just a really traditional Catholic who's just
mhm,
trying to be intellectually honest. You know what I
mhm.
mean?
Sure. Oh,
So
totally.
I can't hate her for that, but so that stuck with me. Then I had another woman reach out who's become a really good friend of mine, and her name is Eileen Tully, and she told me to read this document called "Hope of Salvation for Infants Who Died Without Being Baptized," and
Mhm,
that's a theological commission done in 2007 under Pope Benedict, who approved it when it was finished. Um, and that's basically a summary of the major teachings and the saints who have spoken about this throughout time. It starts with Augustine. I love Augustine and still trying to finish the confessions, but I felt betrayed by him when I read that. I was like, "You're amazing. Wait, you think my child went to the highest layer of hell where they only suffer a little bit?" Like that's what he taught. I think it was Aquinas who then kind of added to that and then said, no, it's this place called limbo, which is
yeah.
still the upper
Well,
limbo
yeah,
means
because, like, all of the righteous people before the coming of Christ, they wouldn't have suffered either,
yeah,
like, they were righteous in God's eyes, and they were awaiting Jesus to come and release, and that's
yeah,
why there's a part of me that wonders, like, maybe that's where these unbaptized children go, and then at the
yeah.
end of time, at the final judgment, they're welcomed into the kingdom of heaven if they don't go directly to heaven, you
So
know?
so my husband, he has a master's in philosophy, and so I usually just take these things to him.
Yeah,
And
that's totally fair, I would too. If I was
so
married.
first I read the document and then I come to him and tell him what I thought, and he looks at me and he's like, let's start over. Like, so one thing he said, well, I mean, not, we don't even have to jump straight to that. Like, it's in the catechism that it is definitely not forbidden for us to have hope our children are in heaven.
100%, yeah.
The only thing about this argument that is a doctrine is that you cannot get into heaven with original sin. That's it. It doesn't say, and God can only remove your original sin by baptism that happens while you're alive,
Thank you. Okay, I
right?
think that is the I was just talking about this with somebody because I was making this exact distinction. I said that God operates through his ordinary means through which we receive grace through the sacraments. It says
Yeah.
ordinary means. But God is not bound by ordinary means. He can give grace in an extraordinary manner. He's God. He's
Yes.
not bound by the sacraments. We
Yeah.
are. And so it's really important, in my estimation, to make that distinction when we're talking about things like this, because we have to emphasize, we don't want to inadvertently de-emphasize the necessity for baptism.
Yeah. Yes. And that's what Augustine was coming up against. Um, he was battling Pelagius, who
Yeah.
said like you didn't have to, like it what that original sin wasn't inherited. And so his statements in that context, they don't have to do with the death of a baby, right?
Right.
Um, so my husband, this is the argument that I really like that my husband told me. But so we have plenty of Bible verses where it says God desires all men to be united to him. When
Mm-hmm.
I'm risen up, I will draw all things to myself, right? We know that he desires us all to get to heaven. And we know that God is perfect. So everything he does has to be the most good. It has to be the most perfect. If there's something else, then he's not God, right? Um, it seems against perfect goodness to create an intelligent being, a human person, and never give them the opportunity to choose.
Mm.
Like everything is based on our will. Everything is based on choosing right and wrong in every moment. So how is it that we can believe that God would make human persons who he knows and loves, who
And
are
are made in his very image and likeness.
and
Yes.
are destined, and he says he desires them to be with him? How can he create how can we think that he would create human beings and not give them a chance? They get
Right.
no chance. There's no way for them to choose. So either there's some point where I had someone write a review of the book for National Catholic Register, and she said there's a picture in the book where where it says the baby, in a flash the baby could see, and she saw that as the moment where God had given this being intelligence and the choice to see the truth and choose. So I thought that was an interesting interpretation, because
Hmm.
I hadn't thought that. I just thought when the baby gets to heaven, the baby will receive some sort of knowledge, right? Like we're
Right.
all going to. But and so that was the argument that really hit me. And so then we started talking, like the only thing I could think of was that, well, a miscarriage or a stillbirth has an impact on on the living, on the surviving, and that they will grow in grace and can pull closer to God and gain salvation. But that would be God using a human being as a means to an end, as an object. God wouldn't do that. And
Hmm.
so that's the one I rest on. I don't know. My husband would kill me for sharing it, because he literally won't share anything until he's like researched it for 2 years and
Yeah. Well,
whatever. That's
he's a
just how
much
he
better
works.
philosopher than most then,
Yeah.
because at
But I'm
least
like,
in
hey,
these
that sounds
days.
good. I'll take it. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I fell on. And it's been hard because I go to a FSSP parish, which I love. And
Okay.
we do the co-op there, and super involved. And but I was worried about sharing that I was releasing this book. Um, so I did share it. I sold like 20 copies right off the bat, because I offered it, like at a discount for the parish. But then I wrote one of the priests, because he does reviews in the FSSP missive that
Mm.
goes out periodically. And I thought, do you want to review this? Because I kind of want this to be a discussion. Like I want people to be discussing this idea that we can hope our children are in heaven. I want a debate to happen about it, because there are women like the one who reached out to me. I think that what she believes hurts her, and she, like I think that's a painful thought to have, because it's, if you talk to the women who believe their children are in heaven or hope they're in heaven, they are filled with that hope. They're filled with the
Yeah, and
longing they have for that child is fulfilled in the end,
they want to be reunited with
I
their,
want an
because that,
answer.
yeah, and they want, I mean, it's proper to our nature to be united with our children, right? Like they came
Yeah.
forth from our very bodies and share our DNA. So,
Yeah.
I think that's super natural for us to have that hope, because yeah, I mean, the I couldn't imagine. It's truly, I remember I actually talked to Dr. Peter Kwasniewski about this years ago when I worked at LifeSite. We were heading to the airport, and it was shortly after my miscarriage, or within some time frame after my miscarriage. And I remember asking him this question, and he fell firmly on the side of these babies go to limbo.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, like if that's what it is, he's a lot smarter than I am. So like I would be perfectly resigned to that, even if I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But it does strike against every fiber of my being to think that that I would not see that child again someday. So I still, I'm like, it's up in the air for me, but I think we do have reason to hope for the reasons that you've outlined. And just when I consider our very nature and the nature of God, it just seems unjust, in a way.
Well, I don't want to like smear my parish, because that first priest was definitely believed in limbo. And then I wanted to offer the book to the woman who does like outreach and helps people bury their babies,
Mm.
and I'm like, I want to give you a bunch of these you can give to people, and she said, has the priest approved it yet? And I said, well, no. And so I went and talked to the second priest, and he took a while and he wrote back and he said, I had to pray about this. Like, I really loved that response. He was like, I had to pray about this for a while. This is a really heavy topic. I would be okay with her giving your book to, people as part of the ministry if she prefaced it with the fact that it is not actually church teaching. And so then I wrote back, I said, so it's kind of on the same level as limbo, right? Because limbo is not church teaching. And he did. He said, yes, both of those are theological opinions that are okay for you to believe. One has just been more traditionally held. And like, I wanted to like print that email off because I love my priest so much. And but like to think like you wouldn't advise me to have hope that my baby's in heaven. Like,
Mm.
no. So I really loved that response. Anyway, so I feel like there was some closure with like how my parish received the book.
Mhm.
And I can kind of let it go. My husband was like, don't push this. Like, what like the traditional priests believe. Like, this. Why are you pushing this? And I was like, because I want to talk about it.
Yeah,
Like,
we need to talk about it. We just
yeah.
have to talk about it. I mean, I feel like more people are struggling with infertility than ever, and it's just really something that has to be discussed. We can't
Yes.
just like ignore it anymore because this is a really significant theological question that it strikes at the very core of our human nature. So, no, I'm really glad that you're bringing this to the fore with your book, Jellybean, A Baby's Journey to God. If anyone is watching this and hasn't purchased it, there should be a link in the description for where you can buy her brand new book. It's on back order, like we mentioned before.
Yeah.
So you can buy it through Holy Heroes, right? Is it
Yes.
being published anywhere else or at this time, or
No.
is there anywhere else? Okay.
It's Holy Heroes, but you can find it in other bookstores online. She also, the woman I work with at Holy Heroes, has set up a bulk order discount. There's discounts for parishes and charities. Lots of charities have already picked it up and are going to be offering it. So that's there if you work with women who suffer with this.
Yeah, well, it's just a tremendous gift. My order is on back order. I'm going to get it soon. But I really appreciate you sending me the PDF too, so I could get a glimpse at it beforehand and read it. And I really highly recommend it. I mean, I think, like I said, I know so many women who have struggled with this significant cross and are struggling with it as we speak. And I just think having some place like this, like what you talked about, of one of the reasons why you like wait for the climax of someone telling their grief story, like this
Yeah.
trauma that they experience. I think it's because it helps us feel connected. Like, wow, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And
That's one of the
this
things that changed in me after I lost Sloan. Like, I have more capacity for compassion.
and
Like,
empathy, like, and we need
yeah.
more empathy. I've talked about a really great book called Why Empathy is Essential or Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. And it talks about all of the implications of when you have a society that lacks empathy. And I do think that experiencing trauma like this gives us a gateway into understanding other people better and humanizing us. It's that humility, right? And so this book I think will help people realize like I'm not alone. Somebody sees me, and there's so many other women or families who are struggling with this cross, even though it feels really isolating at times,
Yeah.
especially as a Catholic, where we're very open to life, you know?
Yeah. A
And
word
so
about that. Oh, go ahead.
go
Sorry.
ahead. No, 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 you go ahead.
I never really talked about like my husband's role because I do think that's important.
Oh,
I
yeah. I mean, I'd love for, I mean, if you have a few more minutes, I want to be
Yeah.
respectful of your time, but if you
No, the
want to
kids
share
are at
about
the
that.
at the splash pad. I got a sitter.
Okay. Ah,
um, uh, so I know like there's a man named Patrick O'Hearn.
yeah.
He has several books, and I helped him write a children's book on Our Lady of Champion, and then he just released a book for dads on baby loss, and then
Yes, he did.
he has another book coming out with Sophia this summer. My story will be in there, and a lot of other stories are compiled in this book. So he is doing a lot for this. But I think he's kind of different, I think, than how most men react to it and grieve. So after we lost Sloan, I remember I was just crying so much, and like I was still getting stuff done around the house and like trying my best. And I just apologized. I was like, I'm sorry that I'm just more needy than you. And my husband was like, what are you talking about? He said, you carried our daughter in your body. Like you're physically missing something right now. Like all of your
Her
hormones.
cells are in your body still.
Yes, and you're like when you go through labor and you no longer have a baby, like you are supposed to be breastfeeding. You are filled with hormones and endorphins and all these things that make you bond with your child, and you don't have that. Like you're in physical pain that I do not experience as a grieving man after a child loss. So it's going to be different for you. And I was like, man, I love you. Like just bringing that out. I never even thought of that, you
Uh,
know? And
yeah.
so he was really understanding, but again, like his grief
Not
wasn't
all
going to,
men are, though.
no, they're not. And I think one thing women can do, I know it sounds terrible to be like, you're grieving and you're in pain, but you should do this. Like, don't expect them to grieve the same way as you. Like we've talked a lot about just sitting in the silence. That might be what your husband needs. He might need, like, I went on 2 dates with my husband during that time just so we could just be in the quiet, calm, and talk about what we had been through. And I feel like, I mean, I've seen in talks I've listened to and stuff where like women take it personally or feel like their husband don't grieve the do not grieve their children, or love their children because they're not like weeping or torn up. My husband like grieved heavily, and he did cry, but he didn't cry as much as I did, and he didn't cry as long.
Mhm.
He really just felt the need, like he grieved more over my grieving and the children grieving than he did, I think, for his own pain, because he really stepped into the role of like sailing the ship through all of this, you know,
Yeah.
and like making sure that everyone's taken care of, making sure that like I didn't break down. Um, and so I think they are grieving, but we have to respect the way that they grieve, and we can't pull on them. We
Mhm.
sometimes we just need to be happy with them pulling us close on the couch, you know, like.
Mhm.
But one thing I did tell him is like when I feel like I'm just drifting out to sea, like I just need a hug. And so our thing
I
was
had to say
just,
that too.
yeah,
Yeah.
our thing was just, I'm gonna come to you during the day every once in a while. If you just hug me and like run your hand on the back of my head, like I'm gonna be golden, you know. I just need to
Mhm.
know that you're with this in me. Um, so yeah, that was his grief, but um even like we have 2 interviews next week, and I know that like I had to enter back into like the depth of my grief to kind of do this book release, or I wasn't going to be able to connect about it.
Mhm.
And I knew he needed to also. So we went and saw the 45-year anniversary of the movie Alien. And then I made him promise me that afterward he would talk about the interviews, and like I had to mock interview him, and I'm really excited for those 2 interviews because like he doesn't talk about it a lot, and
Mhm.
he doesn't share the depths of his heart the same way I do.
Mhm.
So, I don't know, I hope those
Where
are
are people gonna be where can people find those interviews as they come out over the next couple of week or so?
Oh, well, I have 2 left in the lineup, and, one is called Everybody Suffers, and the podcaster Carl, he, really wants to bring people closer to Our Lady of Sorrows.
Mm,
So that's what that's based
yes.
on. Uh,
Beautiful.
and then, A Light in the World is Christina Rossi, and it's just a radio show, um, and, she just likes to feature people who are living the faith out there. Um, the other thing I wanted to share is that I have an Etsy page where I commissioned Chris Lewis of Baritis to make an image for baby loss memorials, and like our work friendship has just always been very like spirit led, because I asked him to do this, and he's very busy,
Yes.
and he said, when I don't have time now, but I want to. And then he started to just kind of let it ruminate, and then he wrote me and said he was ready to do it, and that he had actually lost his own child, and was like, my wife came to me and said she wanted an image made, and it was like the same one that you wanted.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, that's I even said, like, okay, you can have the image. You make it, you sell it, it's yours, right? Because he's like already doing me a favor, just squeezing little old me into his his schedule. So, but he was like, no, like, this is your outreach. And so I sell those, and I sell them on prayer cards and memorials. I've also made like quick turnaround funeral cards with like your child's name on them. So
And your
my
shop is called Visions of the Good Help, right?
yeah, it
Okay, I just
started.
found it. I'm gonna
Yeah,
I'll pull it up too for
it
people.
it started as a way to encourage people to have a devotion to Our Lady of Champion, because it's such a new apparition. When I first met Our Lady of Champion, um, there
Mm.
was nothing there for me to frame, or no stickers, and so anyway, that's what this started with, and then now I just throw up whatever I can find the time to make.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So I'm excited for people to go check that out. I'll definitely add that to the description here. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing so much of your heart with us today and sharing about your book. I really hope people go buy it. And I am really looking forward to finally having it in my home so I can read it to my children and explain a little bit more to John about those questions he's been asking
Yeah.
about his brother Michael. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me share my heart, because it's really hard to put all of this into a summary, and to worry about getting cut
Absolutely.
off, and it's been really healing for me.
Oh, praise be to God.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.